one critique that the book elaborates is that of image AI, the exclusive focus in the design disciplines on the image. And we try very much with current available platforms to go deeper into tectonic, morphological, geometric, fundamentally architectural conditions, as I find. While the image AI is opening or has opened a lot of, let's say, theoretical new ideas and discourse around aesthetics, which is all good, and I think has propelled the discourse in some way. I think in other ways it's quite limiting to consider AI only as a form of image production. So you see here on the top right, it starts with a physical model, and then not an image, but a geometric mapping, and then also a form of positive hallucination, if you will. So you understand these reconstruction engines in AI that they have now, which basically map a physical object into 3D geometry. They infer from a large set of geometries that they're trained with. So in a certain sense, you can argue that you're sharing a much larger mind. These geometries also ultimately are created by humans to then infer geometries and morphologies onto the physical object that aren't necessarily inherently present in it. So you see here an example of that shift on the top right, and also a final model by Anthony. On the bottom left, you see by Kaz, and we've been working with this for a number of years now. You guys are all familiar, I'm sure, with the catenary curves, you know, the things that both Gaudi and Frei Otto have been doing so beautifully. And so this is sort of the idea that this is already a material agency. I don't see any other way of thinking about catenary curves as a material physical computation to begin with. But we bring in the computer the robot on the one side, which is the extrusion of the plastics. The tool path is produced by us. And then the geometry that comes out in its first instance is actually a function of the physical material optimization, if you want to use that word, a la Frei Otto. And then what you see on the bottom right is we're working with these AI engines to further, once the human and the material intelligence already is unfolding through these inference that I was just describing of these geometric AI models, we try to open up the process and perhaps discover new avenues of design. Here's another example. The top right is in a similar vein, relating thread models, also a kind of a process associated with Frei Otto's work, and various other physical models, ice models, which is something more coming from, more inspired by Heinz Isler, the Swiss engineer. We've been dipping cloth in freezing it and turning it around and creating this beautiful, mostly gas station covers with this super, super thin concrete shells. So we teach this always in January when it's really cold in New York. So students were working with these kinds of very physical techniques, but then they move it in the AI domain. And on the left side, you see a specific industry-specific AI model called Forma by Autodesk, which just came out when we started using it a couple of years ago. It works with basically urban massing. It's one of those AI models that are, yes, unlike the image AIs, very much, let's say, in touch with the morphology and geometric principles that come straight out of conventional architectural thinking. And in that regard, quite meaningful in the early stages of urban design and urban housing. However, they seem a little bit close still, in my mind, to the parametric engines that we are all familiar with, that we've been working with for perhaps the last 25 years. And I do want to make the distinction, and the book does that very clearly, between the parametricism, to borrow the word by Patrick Schumacher, and the potential of AI. Because the parametric engines, they're all directed, and the parameters open up a design corridor, yes, but the boundaries of that design corridor are from the start completely defined, can never leave that corridor, right? So you have variations on a theme, but you won't be able to find new ideas. And I argue that AI is actually fundamentally different, because it does not work in an algorithmic directed sense, but it is, as I mentioned before, it's creating a latent space, and that latent space can be probed, if you will. By the way, Juan, thank you very much for referring to probe. You might be one of the very few people who understood that that was a Deleuzian reference back then when Herman and I had that company. I haven't even thought about that in a long time. But anyway, the latent spaces that are opened up by AI are fundamentally different probe spaces than those by the parametric engines. I would argue that they don't have actually a limit. Theoretically, they don't have a limit because the latent spaces are really an identification of patterns, and these patterns can be infinitely expressed into phenotypical outputs, right? Versus the parametric engines are limited to a finite set of, parameters, right? So this is a long way of saying that we work with what is currently considered an AI urban design tool, which creates these pristine, very clean geometric objects, and then we move them through a process of 3D print casting, as you see on the bottom, into the messy materiality that I described in the book. Messy as a good thing, as a thing that the material can unfold its own intelligence. And so you see these urban models at the bottom left and the bottom right. Youssef created that board on the bottom left, and I think the bottom right is Begimnar. And here we see yet another approach to overcome the dominance of image AI in current architecture discourse and in the design disciplines at large. And we explored the potential being really going back to the roots of architecture and the very disciplinary idea of plan graphics, organization, tectonic elements, structural elements, and we created these housing hybrids and built something which we refer to as the hybrid housing matrix, which is an infinitely expanding set of possibilities. And this is also what's on the cover of the cover of the book is basically an excerpt of these. And your students, I'm sure, are familiar with at least a couple of these floor plans, where they might never have seen all of these because these are AI generated, but these you might recognize. Okay, let's move on.